So I'm going to do a quick video talking about what camber is when talking about the suspension of a car, and also what camber gain with roll is and why it's important. So first, let's talk about what exactly camber is. Let me just sort of do a little quick screen share. So this is what camber is. Camber is essentially how your wheel tilts sort of inwards or outwards with respect to the car on sort of like a vertical axis. So if your wheels are sort of turned in, you can see this is negative camber, and this is positive camber here. So most of the time, sort of cars have zero camber, so the wheels are actually vertical. They're not tilted inwards or tilted outwards. They're vertical. So let's talk a bit more about that. So when you're looking at a car like this, so right now we have zero camber. The wheel is more or less pretty vertical here. This is from the front view. What you want to see when your wheel moves up and down is that you get a slight bit of negative camber here. You see that? As the wheel moves up from its resting right height, the wheel turns inwards. You get a slight bit of negative camber, and this is referred to as, well, camber gain with roll or negative camber gain with roll. So the same thing. We're getting more of the negative camber as the wheel moves up and down. And this is something you want to look for. You want to get, as the wheel moves up and down, you want maybe 5-6 degrees. You don't need a huge amount, but what you want to see is a little bit of negative camber gain with roll. And let's talk about why that's important, or why we want this. So as the wheel, okay, let's say you're banking around a sharp corner, your car is going to have an effect where it sort of rolls to one side or the other. You might experience this whenever you're driving and you take a sharp corner. If you're turning left, your whole weight shifts to the right, or everyone in the back seat goes, flung to the right. And this is because of centripetal force. So as you're banking around a corner, there's some sort of weight shift. So let's look at this car from, the back side. Right, so let's say we're taking a sharp turn to the right. So this wheel is turning inwards. The weight of the car is going to shift to the left, right? As we're turning right, the weight is going to shift to the left, and we're going to find that this wheel raises slightly more than the wheel on the right-hand side. And in fact, what happens is the weight doesn't only shifts onto the left-hand side, but the car sort of rotates and tilts a bit, so that this side is sort of tilted outwards, and this side is more, the shock on this side is more compressed than the shock on the right-hand side. Well, why is this important? Well, there's a goal when you're designing suspension that you always want the wheel to be perpendicular to the ground. If the wheel is most perpendicular to the ground, you get the most amount of traction, and in the idea, with the more traction, the faster you'll be able to go or through a corner. So if the car is rotating, now this is back from the front view, if the car rotates onto the right or rolls sort of, I guess from this view, clockwise, the wheel is going to shift upwards, and that'll cause the whole car to roll to the right. And we notice that all of a sudden the base of the wheel is no longer flat with the ground. It's actually kind of tilted, but this is actually what we want because the whole car is tilted itself, and all of a sudden we'll find ourselves that the wheel is still perpendicular to the ground. So a negative camber gain with roll allows us that as the car rolls, the wheel always stays perpendicular to the ground. Right? As the wheel moves up, we see it tilt slightly inwards, but that's okay because the car is tilted sort of in the opposite direction, such that this remains flat with the ground. So what we're looking for when we're designing suspension is a slight bit of negative camber gain with roll. I'm talking something about like maybe 4 or 5 degrees. It's not super critical, but really what you want is you don't want it to be perfectly straight where the wheel always stays at zero camber, and you don't want it to be the reverse. That would really be the last thing you want, in which the wheel turns the opposite direction. But a few degrees inwards is what you want. And in order to get this, there's many different ways. I found the easiest to just simply make sure that the top A-arm is slightly shorter than the lower A-arm, and this is often aided by the fact that the top mounting point on the knuckle is often further inwards or further outwards with respect to the wheel than the bottom one. So it's not actually that hard to achieve a slight bit of camber gain with roll, but it's something you want to keep an eye out for. There's a few other ways of achieving a negative camber gain with roll. One is from, let's say, this front view here. Let me just center this. As the car is like this, one thing is to think about the different arcs that your A-arms are traveling on. And so to imagine this like this curve that they're following. And you can think about, geometrically how these curves will result in the camber gain. So, this one will have a slightly, slightly longer or shorter arc than this one. And as you move it up and down, as the two A-arms travel throughout their respective arcs, we'll see that this one starts moving in sort of inwards before this one does. However, I think my best advice in terms of trying to get a nice sort of camber gain with roll is to just experiment and play around with the different respective lengths of the A-arm, as well as messing around with the tab locations here, moving them inwards, outwards, upwards, down, until you get something that really works well. It's not super hard to get a decent camber gain with roll, and you also have sort of a wide range in which camber gain with roll works well for the car. So yeah, that's my advice in terms of trying to get it. I hope this makes sense in terms of why you want a slight amount of camber gain with roll. So thank you for watching the video.